Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, want to raise a topic and a frame that I don't believe has been raised thus far in this hearing. For most states, the age required to legally purchase a rifle and the age required to cast a ballot are both 18. However, there's some shocking disparities in legal state requirements for obtaining a weapon versus casting a ballot. In 25 states, voters must be registered and have specific forms of ID in order to cast a ballot. But those same states allow people to buy rifles without permits and require no background checks for some sales. Additionally, in a majority of states, new voters are able to obtain a rifle quicker than they're able to cast their first ballot. It seems to me that we have our priorities entirely backwards when it comes to this, when we make it easier to buy a gun than we do to cast a ballot. Two questions for Mr. Rogers. Broadly, what does it say to you that we make it so much easier in so many states in this country to buy a gun than we do to let people vote, eligible citizens? And second, maybe more specific to your experience, given your efforts to address the trauma and racial disparities at the community level, could you discuss your approach to gun violence as a systemic trauma, physical, mental, and otherwise?
Thank you, Mr. Padilla, for that question. Undoubtedly, the challenge of gun violence is related to the fact that we have guns. Without guns, there would not be gun violence. I want to start out by saying, Black Lives Matter. 57% of all gun-related homicides are among Black men. My three African-American sons, are 25, 22, and 18. They're at highest risk in this country of being killed by a gun. The fact that when my 18-year-old voted for the first time this year, he had to go through a number of steps in order to do that and exercise his right as a citizen to vote is just representative of the fact that we have certain steps in order to be legally eligible to vote. It seems backwards that those steps would be so much less for doing something that could be harmful to another citizen or to themselves, the purchase of a firearm. Broadly speaking, it's not an either or with respect to gun control versus addressing violence as a public health problem. I think we need to do both. With respect to the fact that chronic disinvestment in minority communities, especially communities of color, Hispanic and African American communities, place young Black men at a high risk of being injured. The adverse experiences of trauma over the course of their life cycle and intergenerational poverty disproportionately affects and places Black men at a higher risk of dying from gun violence than graduating from college in this country. Yeah. And in many ways, we need to find ways of addressing the upstream factors that lead to those risk factors for Black men and change this approach to our national crisis.
Thank you. I think it's a subject area that deserves a deeper dive, but I want to take my final minute here to raise one more, I think, critical and urgent issue. On March 17th, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security released an unclassified summary of assessment on domestic violent extremism. That assessment found that domestic violent extremists motivated by biases against minority communities would pose an elevated threat to our nation throughout the rest of the year. We're talking right now. However, violent attacks against minorities, specifically Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, have been on the rise since early last year. In fact, the day before the summary was released, a domestic terrorist entered a firearms dealership in Georgia, purchased a 9mm handgun, and received it almost immediately due to Georgia's no-wait gun laws. This terrorist would go on to murder 8 innocent people later that day, including 6 Asian women. Now, a 2017 study published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that the waiting period laws reduce gun homicides by roughly 17%. Stats, folks, hard data. However, only 17 states, including the District of Columbia, currently require waiting periods, and there's no federal law requiring waiting periods. If waiting periods were expanded to all states, the country could see roughly 1,700 less homicides per year while imposing no new restrictions on who can own a gun. Ms. Thomas, could you speak briefly to the constitutionality of longer waiting periods and the possible benefits that they represent?
Well, I appreciated your citing to peer-reviewed, research-driven statistics that show how waiting periods effectively reduce rates of homicide and suicide, particularly when it comes to suicide. We know that waiting periods are an effective tool for ensuring that those that are in a time of crisis have some space to get the help they need. As far as the constitutionality goes, there's absolutely nothing in the Second Amendment itself and Second Amendment jurisprudence or in any court's decision that would inhibit us from passing things like waiting periods. It's simply a good public policy decision. There's no constitutional impediment, and there's no reason we shouldn't be taking that kind of step to ensure that we save lives and protect people in our country.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. I might just say for those who came in late, we recognize Senator Cruz, Senator Tillis, and